Hello everyone, welcome to the 2020 South African Book Fair. I am Delphin Hlungwane, an accredited South African Sign Language interpreter and a council member of the South African Translators Institute, SATI for short. Interpreting for us today is Trudy Tienison, also an accredited South African Sign Language interpreter. I am here to introduce to you the little-known field of South African Sign Language poetry and to share the contribution that SATI can make. A few disclaimers before we begin. I will not be teaching you South African Sign Language, nor is it ever appropriate for a hearing person to teach this unique and beautiful language. Nor will I be teaching you the creative intricacies of South African Sign Language poetry. Lastly, all materials used are with the kind permission of the proprietors who will be acknowledged during and after the presentation. Our presentation today is divided into 3 parts. I'll start off by answering some frequently asked questions about South African Sign Language. I will then introduce you to some South African Sign Language poetry, show you a poem, followed by a brief analysis. And lastly, I will cover SATI's role in accrediting South African Sign Language interpreters. Now, as is the tradition from 2020, let us maneuver our virtual systems and let me share the screen. And we need to get our interpreter in sight and visible. All the wonderful skills we have learned because of the new normal. Okay, I might not have successfully learned the skills, but maybe I have. There we go, got it. So, let's start the slides. Frequently asked questions. There are an infinite number of questions that one can ask about sign languages in general. And we don't have an infinite amount of time. And I certainly don't have all the answers. Therefore, we will limit ourselves to 3 questions. Firstly, are sign languages real languages? The answer is yes, a resounding yes. The misconception existed, and sadly still does today, that a sign language is a spoken language just on the hands. This is absolutely incorrect. The first linguistic research into a sign language was published by William Stokey in 1960. And he found that despite being a manual visual language, sign language is actually a fully fledged natural language with syntax, grammar, morphology, and other linguistic features that are found in spoken languages. And Dr. Stokey studied American Sign Language specifically, but as more linguists undertook research into other sign languages, they also came to the same conclusion. Our next question. Are sign languages universal? And the answer is no. So a sign language is the language of a deaf community whose members identify themselves as being a linguistic and cultural minority rather than being physically deaf. And sign language is developed in different communities, in different deaf communities around the world. And most of these communities did not encounter each other, so their sign languages are different. And sign languages are not linked to the spoken language of their region. A good example would be British Sign Language, BSL, and American Sign Language. The United States and the United Kingdom are 2 different countries on the opposite side of the Atlantic Ocean. They have English as their official languages, and yet their sign languages, ASL and BSL, are completely different and are not mutually intelligible. So the South African deaf community uses South African Sign Language, SASL for short. And just like spoken languages, there are dialects of SASL, but it is still one language. Our last FAQ for the day. Is South African Sign Language an official language? Drum roll, please. No, not yet. It is recognized in our constitution. It is supposed to be an official language of learning and teaching, and recently it became a subject in schools for deaf children, but it is not yet an official language. DEFSA has for many years been lobbying Parliament and other relevant institutions for a constitutional amendment to make SASL our 12th official language. It has been a long, arduous process, but with the President's announcement in the 2020 State of the Nation address, South Africa is one step closer to welcoming its 12th official language. On that positive note, let us get into SASL poetry. I will just be opening the door to this field, to this beautiful art form of SASL interpreting, or rather SASL poetry, not interpreting. We can imagine in the theme of a book fair that we are in the wardrobe, the back of the wardrobe of C.S. Lewis's The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And I will be handing you a fur coat. And now it is up to you to step into this world of SASL poetry. So we all know or have an idea of what poetry is. So I would like to begin with a definition of what signed language poetry is. The following is a quote from one of the preeminent researchers in signed language poetry and literature, Professor Rachel Sutton Spence. She writes, "Sign language poetry is the ultimate form of aesthetic signing, in which the form of language used is as important as, or even more important than, the message. Like so much poetry in any language, signed language poetry is a means of expressing ideas, unusually succinctly, through means of heightened art language." End of quote. Signed language poetry, just like spoken language poetry, uses poetic devices such as rhyme, alliteration, and metaphors. However, these do not present themselves in the way that we are used to in spoken language poetry. However, before we get to that, deaf poets and storytellers have always existed, though they never receive the recognition, or don't receive as much recognition, as their hearing counterparts. I will now show you the 4 of the most accomplished South African deaf artists who have showcased their talent here at home and abroad. We have Atia Asmal, Zoliswa Flekisi, Abraham Mohaya, and Susan Jayana. I would love to show you their work, but unfortunately time is against us. But this does not stop you from taking the fur coat that I've offered you here in the back of the wardrobe and to go exploring for yourselves. Now, the poem that I'm about to show you, Breaking Through, is one of many South African Sign Language poems created by the NPO SLED. And SLED stands for Sign Language Education and Development. They are the leading organization in promoting and supporting deaf education. SLED is made up of a team of deaf and hearing professionals whose main objective is to facilitate the deaf child's equal and democratic right to literacy and learning through the promotion of SASL. I would like to extend our thanks to SLED for allowing us to use their material. We will now watch the poem Breaking Through, and thereafter I will point out some poetic devices. Then you will get a second opportunity to watch the poem through new eyes. Watch not to understand, but to enjoy. So we will now venture through the intricacies of technology again, and our interpreter will temporarily disappear. Apologies for that. We will start the video again. And we are back. I am certain that you enjoyed that. Apologies. And just navigating. There we go. So, breaking through, as the title suggests, is about a deaf person overcoming obstacles through perseverance, determination, and hard work. The main character is stuck in a dull job and sorry, apologies. The main character is stuck in a dull job and decides to take an opportunity to study further. And this is the reality that many deaf people leave school with no qualifications and they end up doing basic menial jobs. We are going to watch the poem a second time, and I would like you to look out for the following: rhythm, which is shown by the speed of signing. In our poem, the beginning is characterized by a slow, plodding pace of signing, where our character is stuck in her dreary sewing job. But then when she starts studying, the pace picks up just a bit and becomes deliberate and steady. We also have metaphors, which are used in South African Sign Language poetry as well as spoken language poetry. Sewing in our poem is a metaphor for the boring, unfulfilling job, and the books that she reads and studies represent the education that our character is determined to receive. Lastly, when you watch the poem again, I would like you to look out for repetition. So when you watch the news, or when you watch the interpreter on the news or the interpreter wherever it may be, I'm sure that you've noticed that the hands transform into many different shapes. In this poem, the poet has done something very unique with the repetition of the hand shape. I would like you to identify the hand shapes in the poem when you watch it a second time. And let's hide the interpreter for a second. While the credits roll, let's get our interpreter back. So, did you manage to see which hand shapes were used in the poem? I will assume that I am looking at an audience and you all have your hands up showing me the different hand shapes, and all happen to be the correct hand shapes, which is the B hand shape and the D hand shape. So well done to all of you, amazing audience. You managed to pick up the handshakes, and imagine me throwing sweets at you. Yay, lots of sweets. Well done. Got it all correct. So using these two hand shapes, just to round it off, that would be the equivalent of a spoken language poem that consists of only two types of repetition. So these two hand shapes, or the choice of these two hand shapes, is not a, it's a deliberate choice. Let me rather put it like that. And now to the last part of the show. For all you non-signers out there, you would need an interpreter at some point, but of course you wouldn't want just any SSL interpreter off the street, right? You would want to be certain of the interpreter's competency and fluency. This is where SATI comes in. SATI is the only organization in South Africa that accredits language practitioners, and since 2013 has been accrediting South African Sign Language interpreters. The accreditation process is a rigorous one and is of a high standard. To the SASL interpreters who are aiming to get accredited, I would advise that a couple of years' experience and deep knowledge of South African Sign Language linguistics are crucial for one's successful accreditation. But now you've gotten your accreditation. That still doesn't mean you can come off the street and interpret a poem, particularly one you've never seen before. Therefore, it is essential that the SASL interpreter works with the deaf poet beforehand in order to interpret the poem and to put forward the poet's intention. Another reason why it is crucial that the SASL interpreter is fit for purpose is because SASL used creatively or used in literature is incredibly challenging to translate into a spoken language. Another challenge is that the signing is simultaneous, but the spoken language is consecutive. Therefore, for such a taxing and valuable task, accreditation becomes essential in order to assess and corroborate the interpreter's competency. The poet, the deaf poet, knowing that their interpreter is accredited, can be certain that while he or she is signing simultaneously, the interpreter will be able to voice competently and fluently and consecutively in the spoken language. This now brings us to the end of our session. I really hope you enjoyed yourselves and have been inspired to research more about SASL and poetry. Well, SASL poetry rather. Enjoy the rest of the book fair. Thank you for attending. Bye.